A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon, Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
I understand that there are those who have turned to the Rabbi regarding the issue of tefillah, prayer. Some people find it difficult to daven, and yet davening is a central aspect of Judaism. What message would the Rabbi convey to such people?
First of all, I would make the point that Hazal tell us explicitly that if a person feels unable to concentrate and focus his thoughts in order to say the tefillah, the Shmon Esrei, and that's what we're referring to here, as I will explain in a moment, then he not only does he not need to pray, but in fact he should refrain from davening at that time and wait until his mind is able to focus on the miswah of tefillah and on the matter at hand. That's number one. Chazal speak about this in Masechet Berachot and Talmud Bavli, for example, in Daf Lamed and Daf Lamed Dalet. There we learn that a person must gauge his ability to daven before he begins to do so. And second of all, that a person must have kavanat halev, and it must have the proper concentration and intention and focus for all of the tefillah. It's true that in the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch Siman Chof Aleph, we find the opinion quoted by the Rama that nowadays, so he writes, even though the halakha is that if a person recited the Shmon Esrei without kavanat halev, without really thinking about what he was saying, he just repeated the words like as an automaton would do, then in fact he has not performed the miswah of tefillah, he did not perform the act of tefillah properly, and therefore he must repeat it. The Rama says nowadays we don't do this because we assume that if a person does it a second time, he won't have any kavanah the second time, just as he did not the first time. And regarding that, I would say that that is almost certainly based on a reality which was definitely an objective fact in his time, in the time of the Rama, and during the Galuth in general, and is still true for many Jews today around the world, but is certainly not true, I would say, for almost all Jews living in Israel today who understand Hebrew. In other words, there's no question that it is more difficult, more of a challenge for most people, for the vast majority of people for whom Hebrew is not their mother tongue, or at least a spoken language with which they are extremely familiar and used to speaking regularly and listening to and hearing regularly. There's no question that for such people, tefillah in general, reading any Hebrew text or hearing any Hebrew text being recited, is more challenging. In other words, in order to focus on the Hebrew and the meaning of those words, a higher level of concentration is required, as opposed to someone who is a mother tongue Hebrew speaker, or who speaks Hebrew very proficiently, and for whom speaking Hebrew is much the same as speaking his mother tongue. For such a person, no real effort is required, and this is something in order to understand, in order to focus on what is being said, and this is something which many people will confirm, people who speak, of course, more than one language proficiently. This consideration for people who live in Israel, who speak Hebrew well and understand the Hebrew language very well, this consideration, I would say, is no longer applicable. The fact that the Rama and other Posakim who preceded him in Europe, amongst the Ashkenazim in medieval times, felt that Jews are unlikely to be able to concentrate on their tefillah, even if you tell them to repeat, and therefore why tell them to repeat in the first place? were simply admitting the unfortunate, the tragic fact that that many Jews had become so distanced from their national culture and language, their true mother tongue, even though it was not practically speaking, their mother tongue, that tefillah or other mitzvot, other things that we do on a regular basis, such as Birkat HaMazon, grace after meals, that such things had become quite a challenge for many Jews, and the standards that were required halachically of Jews were lowered in response to that reality. Today, I would say that this is not true for those who are proficient in Hebrew. We must demand of ourselves the same level and standard of kavanat halev that Hazal had in mind, that the Rambam had in mind when he spoke about these issues. However, it is a fact that either for the reasons that we mentioned to do with language, or more frequently, in fact, is more often the case that a person has difficulty relating to the tefillah, motivating himself in order to daven, and with some people this has a lot to do with that aspect of prayer which involves going to the shul, going to the Beth Knesset. And this is what bothers them. They find that difficult, or they find it difficult to get up on time, or they're pressed for time in general, etc., etc., or they don't really relate, they can't really get into what is going on in the Beth Knesset for reasons that we could discuss perhaps on another occasion, but in order to be fairly succinct in this video, I will just say that the fact is some people don't like going to shul, or cannot go to shul, haven't got the time or the inclination, whatever the reason may be. And therefore, some people also, and this is a big mistake, end up not davening at all, because in the minds of some people, davening is something that you do in shul. And if you don't go to shul, for them that means essentially that you don't daven. I'm not saying this is what everyone thinks or feels, but there are people who feel that way. I have no doubt, and I've heard this from many quarters, that there are such people, perhaps particularly teenagers and other people who, for whatever reason, don't make it to shul, and once they don't go to shul, they basically drop the whole thing. They don't do anything at all, and this is a big mistake. It has to be understood that praying to Hashem is a great mitzvah, and prayer consists of many different parts. What we find in the Siddur, for example, can be broken down into a number of different parts. We have, if you look at the morning prayers, for example, Tefillat Shaharit, we have Birkot HaShahar, we have Pesukei de Zimra, we have Kriyat Shema and the Barachot that go with it, and we have the Tefillah, the Shmona Esrei. And it's important to emphasize that although ideally we say all of these things one after the other, this is not always possible and is not always required. Certainly it is better to say some of those things rather than say none of those things. It is certainly not the case that if a person doesn't feel like saying everything in the Siddur this morning, for whatever reason he feels that way, or she feels that way for that matter, because women are also required to say tefillah, that is Shmona Esrei, that one should not say any of the things mentioned, found in the Siddur. To a person who says to me, I cannot daven, I haven't got the time, or I haven't got the inclination, I'm not in the mood to say all the things I find before me in the Siddur, I would say what you need to do is to say, first and foremost, you have to know that the most important thing that you must say, and this is not even called tefillah, this is called Kriyat Shema, is to recite Kriyat Shema and the barachot that go with it. And it pays to know also what the true version of those barachot is, the authentic and ancient text of those barachot as recited by the individual, which is something we'll need to explain on another occasion. But at any rate, to recite those barachot with Kriyat Shema, even very slowly, takes only 5 or 6 minutes. Rambam writes explicitly that reciting Kriyat Shema with the barachot takes approximately 1/10 of an hour, in other words 6 minutes. And I would say that he's being generous, unless one says it really slowly with lots of kavanah, with lots of heartfelt conviction and focus. So the first thing a person needs to know is, let's say I don't have the time, or not in the mood, I don't feel motivated to daven. I know that if I try and daven, I won't be very successful, I won't have much kavanah. I would tell that person, put on tefillin and say Kriyat Shema with the brachot. And even if that's all that you say right now, that is, you've already accomplished and done the most important thing that you need to do in the morning. The next thing after that, which is very brief and simple to perform, is to recite, ideally together with the action that goes along with each bracha, the Birkot HaShachar, as we've explained, I believe, in another video. And after that comes tefillah. Psukei de Zimra, for example, is something that is not an absolute requirement, not an absolute hovah. And these are facts that are not always fully understood and properly explained to Jews in general, and perhaps to young people in particular. So to sum up, first of all, tefillah is something that one can do everywhere. It doesn't have to be done in a shul. It's preferably done in a shul, but there are situations and circumstances where this is not possible and sometimes not even desirable. A person must daven, that is the hovah, but if a person feels he cannot have the proper kavanah during tefillah, that is to say, Shmoneh Esrei, then he should not daven. That is the halakha. And the most important thing is Kriyat Shema with the brachot and wearing tefillin. These are simple. This is two very simple miswot. It doesn't take very long, and even much kavanah is not required. If one has kavanah at the bare minimum for the first pasuk of Kriyat Shema, one has performed the miswah, and this is a very important, an essential miswah which no Jew should willingly give up on and deny himself and not fulfill that obligation on a daily basis. There is another point I would like to mention in summation, and that is that the word for prayer in Hebrew, we find in fact a number of terms used in the Tanakh referring to the concept of prayer. There's the word tefillah, the verb for which is lehitpalel, which we'll speak about in a moment. There is the word za'aka, there is the word sha'wa, there is the term koli, hashma'at kol. There are many terms which are used in the Tanakh which refer to tefillah, but the normal term is tefillah, and the verb is lehitpalel. And the verb lehitpalel is a reflexive verb, just like the verb to get dressed in Hebrew is lehitlabesh. In other words, one dresses oneself. If someone else dresses you, then we say hu melbish otcha, he dresses you. But if you dress yourself, the person is said to be mitlabesh, he is dressing himself. The root of the word tefillah is palal, pe lamed lamed, which means to demand or to enter into some kind of debate or discussion, etc. And the verb lehitpalel, which means to pray, is a reflexive verb. In other words, the aim of tefillah is not, as many people believe, only to beseech Hashem, to ask for things from Hashem, which is of course a very important aspect of tefillah. But there is another aspect to tefillah which is also very important, and that is the reflexive aspect. In other words, what a person is doing for himself by praying. Just as a person needs to coach himself and to train himself in order to think about certain things or to act in a certain way in different areas of his life, a Jew is required, and it's a human need, it's a fact that a Jew needs to replenish his batteries, so to speak, and to, on a daily basis, get in touch with the basic aims and thrusts of the Torah, of Judaism, of what the Jewish people is in this world for, why we are here, what are we to achieve, how are we to run our lives. What are those things that are important, should be important to us, because we know that they're important to Hashem, and this is Hashem's express will, that these ideas, these concepts are His will in this world. And by reciting the Shmoneh Esrei brachot, the 18 brachot of the tefillah, we get ourselves in touch again with the aims and the aspirations of the Jewish people as described in the Tanakh, in the Torah. And this is a very important thing, but it can't be done by force. So if a person is not in a state of mind to pray right now, for example, if the person has just been very upset by something, is very angry, or very perturbed, or very, very concerned about something, he will definitely be distracted and not able to concentrate, and to recite the words without any real connection, mental connection, inner connection to those words is an exercise in futility, and therefore the halakha is in fact that one should not pray in such a state of mind. On the other hand, it is a somewhat different situation where a person is capable of focusing. He's not particularly upset or depressed or anxious about something, but he's perhaps lacking a bit of motivation. To such a person, I would say, the act of tefillah is precisely aimed at such a person as yourself. The act of tefillah is to motivate you and to pick you up, as it were. It's a pick-me-up. It's to give you drive and direction in life, and to help you remind yourself and recall why you are here, who you are, and to what nation you belong, and what is the program, so to speak, that you are supposed to be subscribing to. So a lack of motivation, even though it's not something which is always easy to overcome, is not really a valid reason not to pray. It is in fact proof that the person needs to pray. And yet, Chazal tell us that certain things are very difficult, and four in particular are mentioned by Chazal as always requiring special steps and effort in order to achieve and do these things in a proper manner. And one of those things is tefillah. So yes, it's difficult sometimes to get yourself motivated, to get yourself going, but one has to try and do so to the best of one's ability. But in extreme circumstances where the person feels he's unable to do so, or he's very pressed for time or what have you, it's important to know that putting on tefillin and saying Kriyat Shema, the brachot, is the major aspect and the most central thing that a Jew must do on a daily basis. And I would add that even though according to the standard halakha women are patur from saying Kriyat Shema, I would recommend to all women that they say Kriyat Shema with the brachot on a daily basis. It takes only 5 to 6 minutes, and as we know, women today study Torah. Many women study Torah, many women go to shiurim. Women who go to shiurim, who study Torah, who enjoy and understand Torah, I think also should enjoy and understand and will benefit from saying Kriyat Shema on a daily basis.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.